All right, hi everybody. It's 101, so I think I'm just about ready to get started with this data validation stuff. Can everybody see my screen okay? Awesome. Great, so let's go ahead and get started. I thought we would open up today by just talking amongst ourselves in this larger group, discussing these questions that are here on this slide. So I'll take some volunteers. Have you begun validating data in your projects, and why or why not? Anybody want to speak to that? And if the answer is no, I haven't started using validations in my projects, that's a fine answer. Just curious as to why or why not why people may be using these already or why people are not using these yet. Anyone? Andrew? I think you're still muted.
I'm sorry. I think I might still have. I think I might have some validations in my project that I do not fully understand, and the reason they're there is because I was trying to figure out how to test that, how to write a test for the fact that I have tables with stuff in it, stuff in them, and so wanting to do test-driven development, I went down the rabbit trail of trying to write a test for that. And I think I ended up with validations somehow. I'm not entirely sure what's going on.
Okay, cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing. I think that makes sense. You were working on your project and you wanted to be able to write tests and make sure that that's kind of sounds like to me, what you're describing sounds like to me like you were testing things maybe on a model level, making sure all of your data was behaving the way you expect, and you ended up at validations. That checks out. I would expect that to be like a possible rabbit hole of TDD. Anybody else have experience like trying out validations? Or Ryan, what's your?
I was reading an article about validations, and one of the things that they said is if you had a website that was selling stuff, you would want to validate that there was a price greater than zero, or there could be a risk that someone could get the things that you were buying for free.
Yeah, that's a big one, right? That's a great example. So again, we're kind of looking at the data coming in and out of our application, and we can't really afford, if we were building a website for a merchant, like your example, we wouldn't be able to afford to just give people stuff for free. We want to validate that the transaction makes sense from a business perspective, right? Cool, makes sense. Kind of like piggybacking off of that, can anybody raise their hand and think of an example in the real world where we might want to use validations in one of our apps? Like, what's another common use case that you could think of? And you may have run into some of these like as a user even. What are some things we want to validate? Can I hear from Ksenia?
Maybe that it requires a username. Like sometimes you have to link your account to like Facebook or Google or Gmail so that there is some sort of a record of your personality.
Yeah, totally. So another account that you're using for like logging in, or maybe a username, making sure that the username only has appropriate characters. I think that's a great example. Thanks, Ksenia. George, did you have a different one?
Yeah, I was thinking like passwords.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's like validations or if that's authentication, but that's something I would think like you would want a password to be like just a strong password so it contains certain features like all caps, special letter, a number, something like that, or like a cap and a lowercase. Is that invalidations or is that something else?
In Rails, I think you could probably use validations in that way, but it would mostly be the responsibility of whatever tools you're using for authentication and authorization. So I think
gotcha.
It could be both. Yeah, it's a good example though, because it's one thing that we would want to check to make sure our user entered what we expected before we persisted that in any way, shape, or form to our database, right? Cool, thank you. Con, I think I saw, was it your hand up? Did you have anything to add to that or any questions?
Yeah, I was just going to ask if like some kind of personal data would be good to validate. I don't know, for some reason, like you might want to validate like social security numbers or something.
Yeah, that makes sense. Maybe we don't want people entering social security numbers that are the wrong amount of digits, for instance, right? I think that's a good example. Cool. Here's another question, and this one might be a little bit of a brain teaser, but just I would love to hear people's guesses or thoughts, or maybe you've run into this already. Why do we need to validate data on the back end if we're using something like form helpers to validate on the front end? Does anybody have like a guess or any insight into that? Why do we need both types of validations? George?
I know that you can do something like SQL injections through the front end. If you like type the answer that is asked, and then you add like a colon or the semicolon, and you type like drop or like delete or whatever SQL command it is, you can just drop everything. So that's why you would need to validate both. Maybe.
Yeah, I think there are a few things we have in Rails that can protect us against something like SQL injections. That's a really common type of attack. So validations could be an extra layer of security against that. Yeah, it's a good one. Anybody else have an idea? Joey?
If you like bulk loading data or anything like that, where you're trying to essentially build it in yourself for whatever reason, or migrating platforms, that way you don't shove in a bunch of crummy data that has to be cleaned up later. It forces the data to always be like normalized and correct.
Yeah, awesome. I like that you use the term normalized there, because we do want our databases to always be normalized. And that's a good consideration. I hadn't really even thought about it that way. Maybe our front end is working perfectly, but then at some point we have to migrate data over to, I don't know, a different database or something like that. We would want to make sure that everything, that's an entirely back-end operation that we would be doing, right? We would want to validate that it's all sticking to the pattern that we want for those tables and columns. Yeah, I think those are all great ideas and really good reasons that we would want to use model validations. I do want to walk through another scenario that I think maybe is not immediately obvious when we're talking about validations. Let's see, let's take a look at an example in the code first, I think. I have this form here. Can everybody see that okay? I can make it a little bigger. I have this form here, and we have a text field that says required true. And this is on the front end. This is in our ERB template. So if I open up, and this is actually in a branch of setlist. So if I go over here to my browser and setlist, I have this name field for creating an artist. And maybe I come into this form and I click create artist, and it says, please fill out this field. I can't do anything. Like, I have to put something in here before I can actually create an artist. But right now, all we have is front-end validations. On that form, I showed you the required true flag in the ERB tag for this field. If I'm a developer, which I am, I might be able to do something like come in here and inspect and open up these elements and then select the specific field that I'm looking at. And you can actually see here, and I apologize, I don't think I can make these this text any bigger here. But if you look at this input required equals required, in our elements when we are inspecting in the browser, I can actually double click in here and take off the required equals required. So if I do that and then I come over here, oh, I'm not running my server. So that's the first interesting thing to notice is I'm here and like I tried to create this and my server doesn't even have to be running for the front end validations to say, hey, you haven't put anything into this field. You need to put something into that field. So I'm actually just going to go over here and Rails S, run my server. Are we running? All right, we're running. So let's say I do want to create something without, like I want to create an artist without a name, and I'm a developer, so I know how to do this. And I can go in here to this input HTML, and I can take out the required equals required, just completely get rid of that. And now I can click create artist and look at that. I have empty artist. This is the one I just created here. I have an empty artist with no name. So that would be another reason that we would want back-end validations as well, because the front-end validations could theoretically be bypassed by a malicious user. And also, even if it wasn't a malicious user doing the bypassing, it's good to have that extra layer of security but on the back end as well as the front end, because as a couple of you mentioned, we really can't afford to have things go wrong with our data. Cool. The next thing that I'll have you all do, let's see, I have the lesson plan here. I would like to give everybody about 5 minutes to read from here, the 1.1, down to where it says consider your artist model. So we'll come back and discuss this as a group as well. So just go ahead and take about 5 minutes to read all of this. The lesson plan is linked in the calendar event as well. So we'll come back at 1:16. Okay, as people are kind of wrapping up their reading of that section, let's talk together about any other reasons that maybe you read about that would make model level validations beneficial. And if you want, you can just shout them out. We'll kind of recap all of that here, and then we'll move on to some thought exercises and some practice of our own. What are some other reasons that model level validations are good to use in our applications?
Could test for uniqueness.
Cool. It gives us the ability to test for uniqueness. Anybody else have something we could add here? What would be the advantage of a model level validation, for example, over maybe like a database constraint? Could somebody speak to what they think the difference between those is and why one might be more beneficial than the other? Aiden?
The model side can work with any database, whereas a database constraint is limited to that one database.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good one. So model level validations are database agnostic. We've kind of discussed this idea before, where anything that's database agnostic can just be kind of taken with our application and plugged into a different database if it ever needs to be. So that's nice because it's more flexible and adds that layer of security without relying on that specific database. Another thing that was mentioned kind of in that documentation that you read is that database constraints can be a little bit of a pain to work with and maintain. So if you don't really need them, then you can kind of use that same logic, but on the model. George.
To validate, like the input is what you want it to be.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know if that's the right way to say it, but
I think so. I think validating that it's we're kind of using the word that we're learning about today, right? So maybe to say that another way, I would say something like we have a level of control over what enters our database. And that way we can make sure nothing bad enters or nothing unexpected, right? So
yeah.
Cool, thanks. I think another one I would add here is that we could validate things in the controller either manually or using callback methods, stuff like that. There are times and places for those types of validations or very specific logic, but in general, it's nice to be able to validate these things on the model because it helps us keep our controllers simple, right? Ryan?
I think going back to the price example, you
Mhm.
could validate that it's like either positive, or maybe if you didn't sell any products that are like less than $1, you could even say like greater, like you could validate that it's greater than a certain amount, I think.
Mm-hmm. So you could, in order to expect very specific values for certain fields in the database, I think that your example is great because you would only want positive numbers. There might be other situations where we want something just as specific, right? Let's see, how can we say that? Ensure specific, I'll say kinds or specific restraints on data. I think this is a pretty good set of reasons to use model level validations. And then of course we saw the other big one is that if we're just using front end validations, that can be pretty easily bypassed. So this is kind of the big, I would say this is the takeaway of the why. Not every single model is going to need the same type of validation every single time. So I think it would be advisable to look at an application and think about validations for the type of data it is. Just really do this critical thinking of what is my end user expecting and what data would be really, what data would be undesirable in this scenario. And that can kind of start to lead the thought process around what validations to write and why. So let's go ahead and move on into some of the more practical application of this stuff. Before we go into specific examples, we should talk about kind of a little at a high level how these model level validations work and when they run. So these run on the save method, the create method, and the update method for any of your active record models. Basically, before that SQL query is sent to the database, before we execute the SQL to say, hey, go do this stuff, database, the Rails is going to check that the validations pass. And if the validations don't pass, there's no point in going to the database and doing all that work. So that's when they run. And we'll take a closer look at this actually. So let's say here I have an artist model, and maybe right now I don't have this, I haven't made this validation yet. I'm gonna go into a Rails console. And let's say I want to create a new artist. I might say something like a equals artist.new. And up until this point, the .new is nothing magical. We haven't called any active record methods. We are being returned an active record object, but new is just the new that we get with Ruby. So this should be pretty familiar. We're just spinning up a new instance of the artist object, and we have access to it locally in this Rails C session with this a variable, right? Now, if I try to say a.save, this is where any validations would run. And right now I don't have any validations on my artist model because I commented out the one example I had here on line 3. So if I run a.save, now I am going to use active record. I'm going to use the active record save. The validations are going to run. And here we go. I have an artist that has been created. Another example of when this might run is I could say b equals artist.create. And at that point, the validations would run. And the same thing with update. So keeping in mind here that create is a combination of new and save. It kind of rolls them into two, or rolls the two into one method call, one command. And the methods where the validations are going to run are save, create, and update. I'm going to go ahead and exit out of this console. And I'm going to uncomment my validation. So this is here again. Now my validation is going to check that we have a name for our artist, that it is present, and that it is unique. So now when I go back into Rails console, and I say a equals artist.new, just calling a Ruby method. Our application does know what an artist is. It knows that it inherits from application records. So it's going to return this active record object with a bunch of nil values. I didn't give it any values. So it's just returning an object with nil values. And if I try to save this now, I have a validation that's going to run. And it will tell me that it can't, basically. So running a.save is going to return false because it doesn't have the information that it needs. Now, if I were to say, to give an example, I guess, of a successful validation, I could do b equals artist dot new and then give the artist a unique name. I don't think I have anybody called, let's see, what have I used? Somebody give me an artist, please. That's not in our set list example.
Picasso.
Picasso? Like okay, visual artist. We'll do it. So now we have a new object. It's returning this. It doesn't have an ID yet because it hasn't been saved to the database. But if I say b.save, now this validation should be successful. So that's a very brief overview of how validations work. Now, another example, for maybe the update, I could say b.update name. What's somebody? So who do I have? I think I have Prince in these seats. Oh, maybe not. What if I just give it an update, but I don't give it anything? Now it's going to return false and say, I can't update this. You didn't give me the required information. It'll roll back. And we'll see that, oh, that's interesting. I think because this is the local IRB scope that's updating the name. But if we were to go look at this model elsewhere, it wouldn't actually update because we tried to pass it an empty value. I'm going to take a pause here and just ask what questions are coming up for y'all, if anything. Claudia?
Yeah, I was wondering if there's any big difference between using validates versus validates presence of.
Yeah, I think that the syntax that you're mentioning, the validates presence of, I seem to remember that this is closer to what we would use in a test with a shoulda matcher, like it should validate presence of, but it's possible that there's like an alias for this line on line 3 that I don't know about. This is, I think, the conventional syntax for a validation in your model. But then there are all kinds of arguments that you can pass it, like presence true is probably the most common one. And then you can pass it like uniqueness true. You could pass numericality to make sure that it's a number. And then the shoulda matchers in your tests will have something like this. Cool. Any other questions before we move on? Okay, I think we'll go through one small activity and then we'll take a POM before we go out and actually try writing some validations. I'm going to call on 3 brave volunteers for this. It's just a thought exercise, and I'm going to ask you to guess some things that we haven't talked about explicitly yet. So just take a couple of minutes to look over this chart and think to yourself of what prediction you would make for each of these outcomes. Just like we did in the just like I demonstrated in the console a second ago, we're going to look at creating an object. And if it's successful, what return value would we expect from that command? If it's not successful, say if we were trying to create an artist and we didn't give the artist a name, what response would we expect? If we added a bang to that and we were looking at the successful outcome and the non-successful outcome, what would change about our return value? And I'm going to leave this up for just a couple minutes so y'all can think about it, and then I'll take a couple of volunteers in a second. Okay, let me get the terminal cleaned up here a little bit. Hopefully we'll be able to see both. Yeah, that'll work. Could I get a volunteer to just work through these first 2 lines of this chart with me? I'll basically have you navigate and I'll add to the chart. George, you're volunteering, right? Or was that a question?
Yeah, I'm volunteering.
Awesome, thank you. So I'm gonna set up a new artist. I'm gonna say something like, we do have the validation now. So first we'll do an artist that's successfully created. We'll say A equals artist dot create name. And I think we'll just say George. What do you expect the return value to be when I run this, George?
So when you run it, you'll see probably some SQL and then it'll return true.
Okay, yeah.
The SQL will be like create something, 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 and then like to whatever table it is.
Yeah, that wasn't quite the right syntax. No, I'm just kidding. But yeah, I agree. I expect that we'll see some syntax or like some SQL specific output that'll say, hey, we created this, and then you said you expected the return value to be true, right?
Yep.
All right, let's see what we get. So there's all that SQL that we were talking about. Select one as yada, 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 insert into artists. And then the return value we got back for this was actually the object. That's okay. I know I'm asking you all to guess, but we'll say that this is returning us the created object. Okay, George, let's work through a couple more. Let's just work through the creates, and then I'll ask someone new to help out with the updates. What if we did this again and we said artist.create, and we didn't give it a bang, but we also didn't give it a name. What do you expect the return value to be?
So I'm gonna guess that it's gonna run the begin, but then it'll run the rollback.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's validating the presence of a name, so you need a name in order for it to create.
Mm-hmm.
And then I'm guessing now it'll return as false, hopefully.
Okay.
I have no idea.
Let's see what it does. And I do want to highlight something you said here where you expected it to run this begin I would describe this probably as a transaction, right? Say begin, and then instead of going down here to the commit where the SQL is actually run, it'll roll back. It'll say, wait, no, stop, I don't have what I need, right? Let's see what we get. So the create is kind of a special one where it will return back this object, but it'll tell you that it rolled back, it didn't create it. And all of these values will be nil, or at least the ones that we didn't give it, the values will be nil. And then this won't exist in the database. It's just kind of a visual representation of what didn't happen, if that makes sense. Okay, so we'll say the not created object. Okay, let's try this again. Let's say artist.create, and this time we're going to do a bang, and I'm going to give it a name of, I don't know, Jameson. What do we think the return value is going to be, George?
All right, so I think that the bang makes it Boolean, so it tells you whether it creates or not, and then maybe normal create is like returning the object. So I'm still going to say that this was going to return true.
Let's find
But
out.
you'll see the sequel again, and then it'll return true.
Okay.
Okay,
That was a
never
good
mind.
guess, and I totally follow your logic. Yeah, no, create's a funny one, but I see where you your train of thought was going. It is just going to like create. So with the bang and without the bang on the success, I would say these two look pretty similar. The created object, it probably even has the same exact SQL output. Okay, one more. What if I don't give it anything here and I do give it a bang? What would you expect to see when I run this?
Okay.
And I'll give you a little hint on this one. We've talked about adding a bang to our creates in tests, and it's for the reason. It's because of what this will return.
So I'm thinking that it'll actually return like some special Ruby like error object. And then I guess it stores it through some module inside of the chain. So I don't know if it'll be false, but maybe it's going to be like a falsy error message.
Yeah, I think
Like
that's
it's
a good
created?
way of describing it. Let's see what it does. We get the same kind of like begin, artist exists, rollback, and then it says active record, record invalid, validation, name can't be blank, and name has already been taken. So what you were saying, George, is you get like a falsy value back. I'd say I would describe this as raising an exception. That's kind of like the Ruby terminology for it. Not necessarily a falsy value, but it is communicating to you like, no, this wasn't created. And here's why. It's kind of nice that when an exception is raised, we get these handy little error messages that we'll be digging into a little bit more in detail. Actually, I think this would be a good time to talk about that. So we'll say C equals underscore, and as a like underscore is just the last thing that was returned to me. So I'm assigning that to the variable C. And now I'm going to say C.errors. Let's see. When we set up an object like that, and once we try saving it to the database, we'll have access to this errors object, which will give us some more information about why it couldn't be created. Now, in this case, C actually grabbed the last successful thing that I did, which was a created artist. And we don't have anything in this errors object, but just something to think about, because we'll be asking you to practice with that later on in the lesson. Okay, thank you so much, George. We'll call it there. Would anybody be willing to volunteer to walk through these two, or I guess 4 really update scenarios with me? And I did forgot to put here that this raises an exception. While I'm waiting on somebody to think about update and navigate for me, is a variable assignment permanent within a Rails console? No, it only lasts as long as the session lasts. So if, for instance, I had my artist equals artist.new, and I didn't save that to the database, as soon as I exit out of this pry session and call my artist, it'll be undefined. It won't know what it is. Yeah, Andrew. Are we looking at update, or did you have a question?
No, I'm volunteering for update because may as well. I have no idea what I'm doing, but oh well.
Thanks so much. Yeah, no, the whole point, and to be completely transparent, the whole point of this exercise is to kind of challenge our expectations of what these methods are doing so that we could think in more detail about like validations and how and why they could come in handy. So thank you. Let's think of an example. I don't remember the variables I set up, so I'm just going to set up an artist for us to try to update. I'm going to call it U, and we'll say artist create. Give it a name of Andrew. All right, so now we have this U variable with that artist instance. Let's say U.update, and we want a successful case, so I'll say name, and this time I'll capitalize Andrew. So Andrew, what do you think is going to be our return value when I run this?
Well, I I would expect it to either return the whole object, which is now changed, or possibly just return part of the object, the part which has been changed. I'm going to guess it returns the whole object.
Okay, let's see
Yeah.
what it does. Yeah. So this is going to show us that same transactional happening here with the begin and the commit and all the SQL in between. And it's actually going to return us a Boolean value. Yep. No worries there. What if we ran an update without a bang and we gave it, let's see. I think that should work. What would you expect to happen here, Andrew?
Well, I guess, yeah, I guess it would probably be false,
Yeah, let's try it.
or nil, but probably false.
Exactly. It's going to return false. And just to reiterate, that's the version of the method without the bang. Awesome. Let's try successful. I'll clear this out. U.update name, new name. Oh, I forgot my bang. Let me add that back in. Cool. What would you expect this return value to be, Andrew?
Well, I would expect that we would want update and update bang to return the exact same thing if it's successful. So I'm going to guess it also returns true.
Makes sense to me. Let's see. It does. You are correct. So that was awesome. Last one here. I'm going to now try to update it with no value with an empty string. And I'm going to keep the bang on there. Now, what do we expect our return value to be, Andrew?
I expect there to be an exception.
Exactly. Active record, record invalid, name can't be blank. And we're seeing this name has already been taken because I did a few examples where I created one without a name before I created the validation. So awesome. Yep, we'll say that this one returns true. Thank you so much, Andrew, for volunteering. And that this one raises an exception. I'll pause here before I take one more volunteer and just say this stuff might seem like very this might seem like very contrived examples and not immediately clear like why this is useful. But I think as we continue on through this lesson and when you all have your class on sad path and flashes, all of this will really come in handy because it's just important to know what you're expecting to be returned in both happy path and sad path, and then be able to handle the result accordingly. Okay, let's do one more. I'll set up a new artist object that I will not save yet, and I'll just say artist dot new. And I think for this one, we'll give it a name and we'll say new artist. Could I get a volunteer to walk through these last 4 examples? And then we will take a pause after we're done with that. Anybody want to take a guess here? Brisa?
I can try.
Okay, great.
So we're going to be doing new.save, and it's going to return true, but it's also going to return like the entire object itself that we created.
Let's see what it does. So what we're getting back is all of how it created the object, and then half of your answer, right, is that it's returning true, and that half is correct. Save is part of the create method, and create will always return us the object that was either created or that it attempted to create. But save by itself is just going to, without the bang, is just going to return this true. Cool.
Okay, so just a true.
Yeah. Let's do another one, newest, and we'll say artist.new. And now we're not giving it what we're expecting in the validation. So when I call newest.save, Brisa, what would you expect it to tell us?
It's probably going to give you a rollback.
Yep. And then do you think the return value is going to be like an exception or false or an object?
False.
False? Let's see. Yeah, exactly. And you're 100% correct there. It's like we saw before, it's giving us that rollback saying, I can't persist this to the database. So this is true. This is false. Oops. One more. Let's do, I don't know, hello. Artist dot new, and then we'll give this one a name. We'll say Brisa. And now if I call hello.save with a bang, Brisa, what would you expect it to return to me?
True.
Yep, exactly. And then what if I do a hi equals artist.new with nothing, and I say hi.save with a bang? Now what do we expect our return value to be?
False.
False?
Maybe, hopefully.
So with a bang, this
Uh,
one's an
Record
exception, but
invalid. Okay.
yep, close. So that is kind of the rundown of all of these. So true, and then raises an exception. So just to kind of review that is, and I think we've said it a few times before in class, but just to reiterate, that this is why we say use a bang. It can be helpful to use a bang when you're creating records in your tests, because that way, if your test setup fails, then you're not wasting time going and trying to debug something that's not failing. It will immediately give you that exception like, hey, I could not create this artist, fix your setup. Aiden, question?
Yeah, does the like the raise as an exception, do those evaluate to falsy? Like would they work in an if statement?
It's a good question. Let's see, hi.save. Oh, I don't remember I think this is a method. I think it might not even get that far. That's a really good question. I don't know off the top of my head. Really, when I think of an exception being raised, it's if you had this in a conditional statement, it would just stop everything. It wouldn't really even bother to give you a true or a false value or a truthy value or a falsy value. It just says, hey, stop, problem. And it just, your whole program just kind of breaks. So the way that I would handle exceptions in actual code is to use something like there's a syntax for being able to catch an exception and then handle it from there. So if you did expect an exception to be raised, then you would, I forget what it's called exactly. There's a begin and then catch block. So if you would begin the block, and then at any point, if an exception is raised, then the catch would give you an opportunity to handle that error, either by returning a falsy value or redirecting to a 500 page. It depends upon the use case.
Thank you.
No problem. All right, let's take a break here and come back at, it's already 1:45, we'll take slightly longer. Let's come back at 1:50. Could I just get a quick, either if you're going to turn your camera on and you're back, feel free to turn your camera on, or if you're not able to, could you give me like a thumbs up reaction so I have an idea of who's back? Awesome, thank you. Give it a few more seconds and then we'll move into our practice activity. Yeah, it looks like we got just about everybody. So today we're going to have a couple of blocks of time set aside for practice, probably about 30 minutes, and then we'll come back together and go through any questions that have come up. And then we'll go back out into breakout rooms for another 20 minutes or so. Something I want to emphasize here is that we haven't looked at a lot of specific examples of how to implement this, but part of the activity today is we're trying to encourage a little bit of productive struggle where you and your partner actually go into some of this documentation and look for the syntax that you would need to validate what is required in these bullet points. So if it's not immediately clear how to get these validations to work, that's okay. And I don't expect everybody to get through all of these bullet points in 30 minutes. It's kind of part of what we were hoping you all would be able to practice with your pair partner today. So I am going to open up some breakout rooms, and the idea would be, I would highly recommend that you try to test drive this and write the validation tests first with Shida matchers, and then go and implement the validations in your models. Should all be in pairs or maybe a couple groups of 3. So just as if there's one person driving, then the other people can support and navigate through these challenges. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can call for help and we'll be able to float between rooms and see what's going on. So does anybody, oh, also I am posting the links to this documentation as well as the exercises in your cohort channel right now. Does anybody have questions before I open up those breakout rooms? Okay. See you all in about 30 minutes.
Hey,
Hey, Andrew.
Jameis. Sorry, I'm having some internet issues and I just left and rejoined. Do you mind assigning me to a breakout room?
Yeah, can do.
Thank you. Sorry about that.
No, that's all right. Give me 1 second here. Yep.
Thank you.
No problem.
validates the uniqueness. Let's take away this one real quick. Well, I'm just going to comment it out. I'm going to comment out the uniqueness out. Oops.
Hi, Jameson.
Hi, just checking in. How are things going?
We just kind of started right now.
Okay.
So we're currently putting in the uniqueness of. So when it validates the presence true, it passes. But when we do uniqueness of, it's going to tell us that Talking Heads fails. Oh, I forgot to add the test. But it still passed. So it's like the name has already existed. So this is basically telling us that we can't create a new artist Talking Heads because it already exists as we have it in our seeds file already. Most likely, right?
I would expect your seeds file and your test database to be different. So maybe looking at line 54 where your spec is failing, maybe that could give you more information.
All right, so 54.
So it looks like you're creating another artist here called the Talking Heads. And my guess would be somewhere else, maybe in your before, you're already setting up an artist with that name. So I don't think this test failure is actually related to your validations. I think it's related to your test setup.
Okay.
Cool. I'm going to hop around some other rooms, but if y'all need
See
me, you
ya.
know where to find me.
Thank you.
Well, yeah, I mean, if that's what you're validating, then yeah.
And then I don't know how to write the
I
test
thought it
for that,
was-
but probably something similar.
Hold on. Yeah, I think you're right, Joe. I wonder if you can chain them.
I
like
am.
that.
I've done this lesson before.
Oh, good
Nice.
word.
Sorry,
How do you
here,
write the
let me
test for
send you
that?
my
It should
notes.
have
It'll be a lot
matched
easier.
Let's see. What would that
Should
be?
match your dates and then.
So you can run. Oh, sorry, Joe. You could run that validates presence of for the validate command instead of validate presence of, and it'll work the same way in test.
It should.
Okay.
Yeah, I wasn't sure if that was a question or you were saying that's how it works.
No, that was a question. Sorry.
That's why I was like, okay. I was like, I don't know.
My voice didn't go up at the end, but it was a question. Yeah.
What was the question?
Are you using it should validate presence of to test the validate command, or is it validate uniqueness of? Okay, so validate sort of encapsulates all of those.
Yeah.
Well, Jameson's here. They spoke to like I guess some similarities and differences between the two in class, but I'm a little unclear.
Your question was about which keyword, sorry? Something with validate?
Yeah, so Joey's, if you look at his test and artist spec, it says should validate presence of and uniqueness of, and in the file itself, it's using validate, not validates presence of. And can you use those interchangeably for the purposes of testing?
I would probably rely on the test to give more information about that, but could we take a quick look at the artist file when you get a second, Joey?
Yeah.
Does my question make sense?
I think so. So you're asking if you've seen maybe a different syntax here in the artist model, is that right? Or a different syntax in the spec? Sorry, I didn't catch that part.
In the model, I've used validate presence of or validates presence of. I think it's plural.
Yeah.
And you mentioned at the beginning of class that there were differences, but I don't remember what you said they were.
I think one of those is probably an alias for what we have here with the specific validates name and then comma and then passing in any other arguments. There could be like something here that's validates presence of that would just validate presence for that one field, but then you wouldn't be able to chain on things like uniqueness or numericality. Validates is more of a catch-all keyword that you can customize. Like it gives you more tools to customize. I think there's another syntax here, that the one that you were mentioning, Andrew. I tend to not use that one because it's so similar to the one we use with shoulda matchers that I tend to get this, like I forget which one is plural and which one isn't, or which one has the S and which one doesn't. So I would just look it up in the docs if you wanted to use the validate presence of syntax here in the model, just to make sure that you have the right one.
Sure. It seems like the test works well. I guess we'll find out.
This is interesting. Yeah.
Joey's is more of your like extra information Rails feedback.
Yeah, this is how I have to do TDD, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right.
All right.
Pardon me.
Anything else before I hop, y'all?
That's it for me.
That's it.
Oh. Have you run your migrations? I wonder. Jameson, we're having an issue. We're not really sure.
Okay.
Do we need to worry about this depreciation warning on?
Old should. You do have shoulda matchers installed, right? That's the only thing that I would double check. Yeah. I think that this deprecation warning is probably okay. But then the other thing that I'm wondering is, yeah, it's complaining about the should syntax versus the expect syntax, which is why I was wondering maybe the shoulda matchers aren't set up the way that we want, because should is also, or has been, a keyword in our spec, and we don't teach that. So I would just double check that you've bundled. And
Got it. Oh, that's probably.
Otherwise, I wouldn't worry about the deprecation warning.
That might be what it was, actually. That was my bad.
No worries. It looks like it's still there. I wouldn't worry about it too much. If it if it ends up giving you more trouble, let us know.
Okay, but this is in general. Yeah, it looks like the documentation. This is what. Okay.
Yeah, it all looks. It looks like you're on a good track to me for what it's worth. I don't think the deprecation warning is anything to worry about.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
No problem.
So this will need to go to the. Not the shoulda matcher documentation.
I don't know yet because I've restarted pretty
Sure.
much over.
Hi there. We are, where are we? We are
at the validation that adds a max length.
Nice. How's it going? Is there any like weirdness coming up that I can help with, or?
I think we're okay now. I was initially putting in new instead of create, and then not getting the feedback that we would expect for create.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So now that we're on that track, I don't think that I've ever added a max length to anything.
Me either.
But I'm sure we can
Figure it out.
Yeah,
come
it'll
up
be
with
in there
something here.
somewhere.
So go back up where we have the list here. Length looks like a probable winner here.
Is it kind of like average? No, it's not average length, kind of.
All right, so we can definitely experiment. So with this name length minimum 2, does that mean a minimum of 2 characters for the name? It can't be like an initial? Okay.
Okay.
All right.
Oh, but we could do a maximum, so that's great.
And we're adding this to what was it?
Songs.
Songs?
Song title.
Okay.
Like
great.
Fall Out Boy songs have ridiculously long names.
All right.
All right, y'all look like you're on a good track.
Thanks.
See ya.
Syntaxes I'm looking for right now, but if you know, you could just plug it in. I think it's, then present's true. Yeah. Give that a whirl. Sweet. I'm bad. I have to start actually like learning the syntax for stuff because I'd be like going in my other things and like copy pasting everything each time. Definitely
the way to
probably need to get
go.
the reps in.
Well, even this syntax is a little weird because it's like in regular Ruby, there's a do and an end.
Right.
And I don't know if this is a hash or if this is a block.
I can shed some light on that. When you have those curly brackets and you don't have you don't see a key value pair, that is the same as a do end block, but it's the one line syntax for a do end block.
Gotcha. That makes sense.
Oh, okay. I was a one-liner in Ruby. I got yelled at, so I wasn't a
For
one-liner
being too
anymore.
clever. Yeah.
Yeah.
It happens. It is very common for like validations and should have matchers tests and stuff though. This is looking good. Do y'all have any questions? I'm just poking my head into some rooms to see how people are doing.
I think we're rocking and rolling.
Looks
How do you feel,
good.
Brian?
Alrighty.
Thank you.
Right, it's gonna be.
Hey, Jameson.
Hello, how's it going?
It's going okay. We're trying to figure out the validating the length of, we're on the add a validation that adds a max length for a song. Oh, that's for a song title. Oh, I don't even think we did the right attribute. Because on the song, that's my fault. On line 6, we did validates length.
Oh, so
And
the maximum length of characters for the name of a song title.
Yeah, adds a max length for a song title.
So validates.
So maybe validates title and then length maximum. I don't know. Does that seem like we're on the right track, James?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay.
And then we had an earlier question about the accessing the validation errors. I mean, that's from the console. So we played around with creating like empty artists, and we got the rollback messages. But you did something earlier where you did something and you put dot errors. Is that more what you were getting toward?
Yeah, so, and I would expect maybe the easiest way to get to that in these exercises is to put a binding.pry in the test or in the controller, depending upon what kind of test you're writing. And then whatever variable that instance is stored in, you should be able to call object.errors. So if you have an artist that doesn't have a name, like our example was back there, being able to call lowercase artist, whatever the variable name is, and then say .errors after you've tried to save it or tried to update it, it at that point should have some errors for you to work with. I'm trying to think about where I would put that binding.pry. Maybe in, I don't know, like a test or something like that. Alternatively, you don't have to necessarily run your test to experiment with the errors. You can do kind of the same thing we were doing by just going into Rails console and playing around to get a feel for what the errors object is like.
Because that's kind of temporary. So we were creating an object, and then we were kind of playing around with it for in console, right?
Yeah. Do you want to walk through that? Would that be helpful if we like walk through getting the errors object real quick, or?
Sure.
Okay,
Sure.
so I'm just kind of orienting myself with what you have here. So you have a equals artist.create. So if you typed in a.errors right here, what would you get? And we can just try it. I think that would be the right thing to try here. And there you go. So what's interesting to me is that it didn't give you probably because you did this with a bang instead of adding to the errors object, it just raised an exception. So maybe if you try going through that process again without the bang, you'll have access to the errors. That's just a guess.
Okay. So new artist, no bang.
Then if you call b.errors, I would expect you to not have any errors because it was successfully created. But if you did like a c equals artist.create with nothing in it, and then you called c.errors, it would probably tell you name can't be blank. Does that Does that make sense?
Yeah, it kind of looks the same though. Would I mean,
Yeah.
so even though there's no errors here, it gives a sort of assignment to where the errors would be, or
I can't talk in detail about how this works, like how Rails does this under the hood, but to my knowledge, what happens is you call like the save or the update or the create, and assuming an exception is not raised, it will run your validations and kind of give you this errors object for free. And you might not have any errors. It might all be like totally fine. But if you were to do, let's try C equals artist.create.
bang. Okay.
Let's run that without a bang and not give it anything.
Oh, just okay.
Now what is C.errors?
It's okay. Yeah, it shows all the attributes as nil.
So this is a whole new object called it's the active record errors object, and then it has these instance variables like messages and details that you can call to be like, you could say like c.errors.messages or c.errors.details, and it would give you back like some kind of data structure with those errors for you.
Okay, I understand now, because before when it worked, there's no messages or details to give.
Yeah, exactly.
Access, and then when there is, it actually filled in, and then we can access it by say c.errors.messages or something.
And one that I don't think is included in the lesson plan is you can do c.errors.full_messages. That's kind of another built-in thing that Rails gives us. I think that's the right, yeah. And then if you had multiple, they would all be stored there in that array.
Oh yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I guess I was too caught up on the number value of tier and then seeing what was actually in that. So that's handy.
Yeah, the little number that it shows after your active model errors is just the object ID. So for every single errors object, it'll be different. You can just ignore that and go on to what looks like kind of an artist object later in the line. And then you can check and see, do I have any messages here? Do I have any details based on the field? So.
Okay. Yeah, I guess I was a little caught up because I thought it would not have an errors ID if there were no errors, but even if there is none, it's still an ID for the blank messages. And okay, so yeah, that makes sense.
Cool.
Cool.
Glad. Anything else before I hop to a different breakout room?
I don't think so.
All right.
Thank you.
No problem.
Length for a song title. Okay. Let's see if we can figure out how to do that.
Hi, Jameson.
Hi, how's it going, y'all?
We are actually, we were actually just about to give up on trying to figure out the third and fourth one that have access validation error when validation fails on the model in your console. Because we're not entirely sure what exactly that means.
Yeah.
And even though we're able to find some methods that look like they'll be helpful, we don't know how to make those things run automatically anytime there's an error, as opposed to something that you call within a program.
Got it. So yeah, this is something that we just barely touched on in class time. So I think it'd be valuable to walk through it really quickly here. Could you just go to your Rails? Do you have, I guess first, do you have the validation in your code that you were talking about? I think that would be, yeah, a validation on any model.
Yeah, we have some validations, the first two, but that's it.
Okay, great. So we have a unique name on artist. Let's go over to the Rails console and try this third bullet point. So.
Okay, and also we're
Rails
getting this
C.
error, just FYI. Is there, that's something we decided
it's
to
not
skip
actually
this.
an error, it's a failure.
Yeah, have you looked at line 53 of artist spec? Because that's where it's failing.
Yeah.
Yeah, let's go over there real quick.
So they're saying we already have talking heads.
Yeah, do you have a
We
before each
created it.
setup block or anything like that? Because that's
No,
probably
see
an
it
issue
here.
with your.
I mean, this is a repo. We cloned this repo.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I didn't mean to say that it's an issue you created, but I think it's an issue with the test setup. I think it's literally trying to create two of the same artist. So I would just change the name of the artist on line 53 and see if that test stops failing. That's actually, for what it's worth, no, not the variable name, the actual name that you're giving the artist, because this is a sign that your validation is working. It's saying, hey, you can't have an artist with the same name. So that's actually good news.
Yeah.
Okay, got it. Okay, it's working. Cool.
Yeah, and that was probably an existing bug in the repo, so I apologize if that led y'all to a rabbit hole. But yeah, let's go back to the Rails console real quick. And our goal here is to access validation errors when a validation fails on a model. So let's say artist equals artist.create. And we're not going to give it anything. We're not going to add a bang. We're just going to push enter. Now, if you type artist.errors, what do you get? This is what that, oh, that's interesting. Oh, see, okay, that's what it was. It was a uniqueness validation, sorry, not a presence validation. So let's try that. Let's do it again. Let's say artist2 maybe equals artist.create. Now here I'm expecting the validation to fail because we already have an artist with no name. So go ahead and push enter. And now if we call artist2.errors, what do we get? So now in errors messages and in errors details, we have some information about the failed validation. Does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
cool.
we're not supposed to write code for this. We're just supposed to use the console. It was a console thing, not a code thing.
Yeah, that probably could have been worded better, but that's how I understand the instructions. I think it says, let's see, access validation errors when a validation fails on a model in your console. So this is all we were looking for. The other thing I would say that maybe is not in the lesson plan that can be really useful is like here it would be artist2 dot and then full underscore artist2 dot errors dot full underscore messages. That's another really useful one to try out.
Wait, say it again.
Here it would be artist2, so the name of your variable of that object, then dot errors and dot full underscore messages. And that'll give you an array of any of the validation error messages that happened.
Nice.
If you have any other questions, we'll be coming back together soon in the big room, but I'm just gonna hop around a couple of other places and I'll see you in a bit.
Thanks. Thank you.
It's like hurts to look at. Okay, well.
Can I ask about how far y'all got in these, just out of curiosity?
We just finished this one, so we're working on the last 3 now.
Okay, cool. That's about what I would expect. Everything go okay? Did any like weird things come up that we could troubleshoot in the next couple minutes, or?
I mean, yeah, I think we're getting it pretty well. The only thing we didn't, we were working through was the validates presence of versus the validates. Like we just tested it a little bit and we saw that like the functionality wasn't the same.
Cool, that's good to know.
But yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think, yeah, no, I think we're okay. I think we get it so far.
I think that's a really interesting one that's come up in a couple of different breakout rooms. So when we come back to the main room, I would really appreciate it if y'all could share your findings on that. Yeah, I'll probably be closing those rooms in about a minute. So either way, see you in a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, sure.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, welcome back, everybody. What questions came up? I think we'll do maybe questions first and let that lead into discussion if anything comes up, but we'll have more time to practice. I just thought it'd be good to regroup kind of here in the middle. What questions came up for you all as you were working on that? It is okay if you didn't finish. I didn't expect everybody to get through all of these bullet points in 30 minutes. Most important thing is that to me is that y'all are getting a chance to try out validations. Kevin?
Yeah, we were really confused by the second from the bottom prompt, add a new column to the playlist table that has a validation only runs on update. Because well, first of all, we add a new column, wouldn't that be a migration? Because they're modifying the database. And then there must be some specific notation for updates for validations relating to updates, I guess. But
yeah. So Kevin, do you mind sharing your screen real quick? We won't go through the whole process, but there are a couple of things that I think we can maybe point to. And yeah, to the first part of your question is, yeah, that would require a new migration. But the thing that I think would be valuable to maybe kind of do all together is to go look for this syntax in the documentation. So I think you already have the right ones up here over here, the Rails docs. Maybe we can look and see if there's a way to only run a validation on a certain action. I might even start by just going and using Command F in the browser and doing like a search for the word on and colon. That doesn't quite look like it. That's confirmation. Let's keep going.
Oh, there's more.
I think there would be a few. I have the advantage of like kind of remembering seeing something with an on colon at some point. I think if you just click enter, like if you keep hitting enter, it'll keep scrolling you through those results.
Kevin, if you were on the index, it's on the right side. It was up top.
Oh, there's something in the index that's good to look at too. Let's go look at if you scroll all the way up, Kevin, sorry.
Oh, yeah, here.
I think that's a better idea. So.
It's under 3.
Create 3.
Yeah, if we click on that, maybe the on. So here would be an example of the on option that lets you specify when the validation should happen. On create will only run when a new record is created. So yeah, this is just kind of to illustrate that a lot of these exercises are asking you to do things that we haven't given you the exact syntax for in class. But thank you, Kevin, for sharing your screen and walking through that, because that's exactly how I would start troubleshooting or researching for this validation. And then, you know, whatever column you added, you could give it that validation and add the on true key value pair. Cool, thanks. Ksenia?
What is the difference between validates length of maximum and is at least. Or sorry, is at most. Is at most and maximum.
Do you have examples of that in your code at all? Like, were you? I can't remember if you were driving. Yeah.
It's on the documentation over here.
Oh, there we go.
Like here and
Yeah.
here.
Yeah, so this is really interesting documentation, I think, because this is just all commented out code, right? But I think we can pick up on a few context clues here, and I'm going to annotate. So here we have a user class. We could think about this as like we're validating stuff on models of artists or songs, where this example is validating something on the user. So this is what you would put in your model with the maximum. And then here, if we take a closer look at line 73, it's telling us, oh, this is how you would test it in our spec. And then this is the syntax you would use with your shoulda matchers to say, is it most? And it's a little bit different from some of the other shoulda matchers that seem very similar to our actual validation syntax in the models. But this is saying, validate that the length of this status update is no more than 140 characters. And that's kind of getting at your maximum validation up here in the user class. Does that answer your question? I think this documentation, to me, I just look at it and it all blends together because it's all the same color. There's no syntax highlighting. But yeah, I think maybe what you're looking for is the difference between like the testing syntax with the shoulda matchers and then how you would set that up in your model.
Yep, makes sense. Thank you.
Awesome. Yeah, no problem. Any other questions? Or if there were like things that you ran into that just you didn't expect and you'd like to share that, that would be great too. Did anybody by chance like try out the differences between using in your model validates and then giving it some arguments and some other syntax, and the longer one, I think it was validate presence of? Did anybody experiment with that at all?
We did experiment with it a little bit, but by no means are we experts.
That's okay. Do you mind sharing your screen just so we could like take a look together? Because this is something that I don't know off the top of my head what the difference would be. So maybe it would be informative for all of us to try what y'all tried or to see what y'all tried. Could you go through it, Logan? Share your screen.
1 second, please.
Or whichever one of you was sharing your screen. I don't.
Logan, I don't know if you have it, but if you don't, I can share.
Yeah, if you could, because I don't think I have the it set up right.
Thank you, Claudia.
I was just working through because I saw what like Ksenia had said, but the first one we tried it with was that first presence of, and it seemed like when you do like validates presence of, and I'll run through this one instead. Name, and then you give it like the uniqueness thing again. It seems like it still saves.
Interesting.
So if I run this, and this is on the playlist name. So sorry, let me exit out of this.
Yeah, no problem. Take your time. Oh, I think you need a closing quote. Yeah.
There we go. Oh, one more maybe.
Parenthesis, yeah, I think, yeah.
Okay. RLC. So if I do like testing is equal to playlist dot new title test, and then if I do oh sorry, I meant to say name. And then if I do testing.save, it saves it and it commits it. And if I do, again, if I try to do a different one now, if I say testing2 is equal to playlist.new and I give it that same name.
Type
it
new again,
should
Claudia.
still.
Instead of name on accident.
Oh, whoops. Then it should still save it. Whereas when you run this one instead, it gotta restart the Rails console. It won't allow you to do that.
it gives you the rollback.
Yeah.
Yeah, so if I do playlist.new name test testing.save. Oh, whoops. Testing3.save. Yeah, so it gives you that name has already been taken. So yeah, it's kind of weird how that works. I was just about to try and see if it works with like length, but
Yeah.
it seems like for presence it doesn't work.
So will it validate what I guess what I'm wondering, could you go back, you'll have to exit your pry and reopen it again, sorry. But could you like go back to uncommenting line 6? I wonder if it will validate the presence at all. Is that something that you tested, like trying to give it, like trying to create an art or a playlist with no name?
Think we did at one point, but I'm not sure if it was with this exact line of code. So
all right, let's give it a try. Yeah.
Okay, so test is equal to playlist dot new name. Or you want me to give it name quotes nothing in it, or just like this?
Maybe actually just try, like this is, I think it's good practice to use new and save like you've been doing, but for this, could we just try playlist.create with no arguments or anything?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
And do it.
So it does look like, and let's do that again, but with a bang on the create. Yeah, it looks like this validates presence of, and then the column name, it appears to be working for presence of, but then it won't allow you to chain on any other validations. So that's kind of along the lines of what I expected. And I'm glad y'all experimented with it because now we know for sure. But that's kind of why I prefer, and I think it's more conventional to use this syntax because then you can make your validations as custom as you want. And I think it might even be like a newer way of doing things in Rails. Yeah, thank you for sharing. That was very informative. We've been going for a while. Let's go ahead and take like a 7-minute palm here and come back at 2:42, and then we'll split out into groups again and try some more examples. All right. I wanted to highlight a quick kind of common gotcha, I think, especially when looking at projects and adding validations to your projects, this one and in the future, and that's Boolean validations. I just wanted to quickly like touch on this and explain it at a high level and like let you all know that there's a special syntax to be looking out for when it comes to validating Boolean fields. And the reason for this is if we have a Boolean field, let's say we have a favorite column for our playlists and the Boolean value is false. If we use our ordinary validations to check for a presence in that field, it will return that, yes, there is a value here. It is not blank because the value would be false. The validation isn't checking for a truthy or a falsy value. It's just checking for the presence of a value. So really what we want to eliminate, if we want to validate that our Booleans always have a value, we want to eliminate nil. And that's why we have to use this special syntax. And this is available in those same Rails docs that y'all have been looking at for this exercise. So that was the main thing I wanted to highlight before we end our class today. The rest of the time, I was going to just keep these breakout rooms open for you all to continue working through this list. And be around for any questions that might come up as you're doing that. You can come back into the main room and we can talk about it together if you have questions. But Kevin, yes.
Yeah, I had a quick question about the Boolean validations you just pointed out. Is it possible, can you just add them all in one line? The inclusion true, false, comma, exclusion nil, just to kind of keep it together?
I'm not sure. I would try it. I would try it and see, and make sure you have like some tests that would fail if that line didn't do what you expected. But I think it's possible that that would work.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions before I open these breakout rooms back up for you to run through the rest of these? I think we'll treat the rest of the 15 minutes of this class as just free form work time, and I'll be around if any questions come up. But this would be a great time to ask any lingering questions that you have. Ryan?
So yeah, just making sure it's okay to ask questions here, maybe related to the validations as it goes for like the join tables. Because like on the IC today, if a mechanic and a ride, like it seems like when you add a ride for like if there's a join table adding something, you can just keep adding, but it's not actually creating a new item. But it would be impossible or you wouldn't want like a ride to be added twice to the same mechanic because you wouldn't work on two. Is that a validations problem, or is it dealt with somewhere else?
That sounds to me more like certainly validations would have like a role in this, but that sounds to me more like logic around the many-to-many relationship. To be clear, was your question when you have like a joins table, you wouldn't want the same ride and the same mechanic to be entered twice, right? Because then that would be a duplicate many-to-many. Yeah, right. I'm pretty sure there's a way to write validations for that, but I don't know the syntax off the top of my head. That's something I would even have to like go dig up out of the documentation. I think what I would start by looking for is looking for the uniqueness of that join table. So ride mechanics or mechanic rides, I would expect each of those foreign keys to be unique. Or there's probably, that's where I would start looking. You don't necessarily need every single one of those foreign keys to be unique, but the combination of the two should be, and that's where I would like start digging around for some special validation syntax.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, just for the sake of time, I think I am going to open up these breakout rooms again, but you can use the ask for help feature if anything weird comes up. And then if you have time today, maybe just going through these checks for understanding at the end of the lesson plan, I'd recommend maybe writing down some answers and thoughts about these in your journal just to kind of solidify the concept. But other than that, that's all I have for you all today. And I'll just throw out a reminder right now to fill out the class survey when you get a chance. Let me open up those breakout rooms, and I'll be here probably till about 2 or 3. No, I'll be here until 3 on the dot. I forgot I had a meeting. Thank you all.